Hi, my name is Carley Sutton with Step in Time Walking Tours, and I'm here today to share with you the story of the worst disaster in Southern Pines history. This was the burning of the Piney Woods Inn. This is a first-person account from Mrs. Helen Huttenhauer in her book, Young Southern Pines. She was 10 years old at the time of the disaster. It was Friday, November 4th, 1910. School had just been dismissed, and I was on my way home. I lived on Ridge Street at the head of New Hampshire Avenue, 2 blocks from the school. I was hurrying along, trying to keep my dress from flying over my head, for a strong wind was blowing. Funny little pieces of something were flying through the air. The fire bell had rung loud and noisily a few minutes before the dismissal, and the fire bell always scared me. I wanted to get home. When I reached the Grover house between New York and Pennsylvania Avenues, I stopped in amazement. Mrs. Grover was standing at the top of the porch steps, balancing a fair-sized tub of water on the railing. When I asked her what she was going to do with the tub of water, she burst into tears, crying that Piney Woods Inn was burning down and that Mr. Grover had gone to the fire, and that she was sure some of those embers flying through the air would set the dry grass on fire. The water was to quench any blaze that started in the yard. More frightened than before, I ran the rest of the way home to find my mother standing at the gate, anxiously watching for me. "Papa's gone to the fire," she began, "and I'm worried." I told her about Mrs. Grover and the tub of water. "You get into the house," she ordered, "and stay with Effie. I'm going to Mrs. Grover." Effie muttered something about Mr. Grover leaving Mrs. Grover alone and she so near her time, and I caught the implication that Papa wasn't a whit better. I planted myself at an upstairs window to watch the black smoke now billowing over the inn. Then I saw Papa running up the hill at full speed. He didn't stop at the house, but went straight to the barn and packing house. We had a long driveway from New Hampshire Avenue to the packing house, and that driveway was roofed over with heavy scuppernong grapevines. Smoke was rising from the dead leaves covering the driveway. To that spot Papa went on a run, stopping only long enough to seize a bucket of water at the horse trough. He doused the blaze and spent the rest of the afternoon and evening patrolling the grounds. The Piney Woods Inn fire was the worst disaster the town had known. The inn was our pride, our one hotel comparable to the luxurious accommodations found in Pinehurst. Built in 1895 by a corporation, it had passed into the hands of the St. John's, good businessmen, but in other ways not up to the caliber of first-class hotelmen. Under their management, the hotel had grown a little seedy in some ways. When a Pinehurst hotel man, Mr. J.M. Robinson, bought the inn in 1908, the townspeople felt that again the place could compete with the Carolina and the Holly Inn in drawing to Southern Pines an elite northern patronage. The Robinsons were still making needed repairs, had redecorated the inn, both inside and out, and had bought $10,000 worth of elegant furnishings. Just back from closing their summer hotel in New Hampshire, they were readying the inn for the grand opening on this Friday, November 4th. Maids were cleaning the 110 sleeping rooms, which could accommodate up to 200 guests, making the 20 bathrooms spotless, sweeping, dusting, polishing. A flurry of cheerful activity was evident throughout its 300-foot length, its 3-story height. Mr. Robinson had gone to the boiler room, a semi-detached cubbyhole in the back, and had started a fire in the furnace, using as kindling pieces of rotten window sills left by the repairmen. He noted that the shavings of fat pine made extraordinarily fine kindling, and left a few pieces on the floor in front of the furnace for later use. Now he and Carl were on the roof, seeing how the hot, dry summer had treated the roofing. Mrs. Robinson and Carl's wife were paying calls in the village. On the roof, the men noticed how strong the wind was, almost a gale. Then they noticed something else, the odor of smoke. They descended to the boiler room to find they could not enter. Thick smoke and flames met them at the door. A spark from the furnace had landed on that rotten fat pine kindling at the furnace door. The interior wall covering of tar paper did the rest. The hour of destruction had come to the Piney Woods Inn. Unable to enter the boiler room or to stop the flames now racing to the main building, the men evacuated the house, phoned for the fire department, and then rushed to the family rooms to save at least some clothing. They saved absolutely nothing. The fire bell, which I had heard at dismissal time, sounded with frantic intensity. Down Broad Street raced the fire truck, down Pennsylvania to Bennett, down Bennett to New York, down the steep grade of New York, and up the equally steep, but much longer, grade to the inn. The engine was followed by practically the whole town. Streets were deserted, store doors left unguarded, as a horrified population assembled at the scene of disaster. Some, like my father, came to their senses and went home to put out small blazes caused by the falling embers carried over the town by the gale-like wind. At least 5 such fires were burning at the same time within the town, and this may be hard to believe, but it is the truth. Burned-out pieces of roofing were found the next day over 2 miles east of town. Have you any idea how fast a 3-story, 300-foot-long building of fat Carolina pine can be consumed? By the time the engine and the townspeople reached the fire, smoke was already coming out through the latticework of the front porches. Clouds were being carried over the roof from the rear. The back of the inn was all ablaze. Moments later, the flames fairly leaped up the fat pine wall of the front of the building and along the eaves. How Nero's fingers would have tingled on his lyre. The firefighters stood helpless. The nearest fire plug was 700 feet away at the foot of a grade so steep that no pressure was possible. The crowd milled around, horrified. There was a half-hearted attempt to save some of the $10,000 worth of new furniture, but only a couch was brought out and a mattress. Men standing 400 feet away from the blaze found the heat so great that they had to keep their faces covered. In half an hour, the Piney Woods Inn was brought to the ground, reduced to a 300-foot strip of blazing wood and twisted iron. Gaunt chimneys stood like sentinels over the carnage. The wind died to a moan. All night, the glow reddened the sky. Men watched beside the pyre. The inn was gone, never to be rebuilt. Several years ago, Bessie and I revisited the site of the old inn. Bessie's childhood home had been within the shadow of the inn. The park had been her playground. She knew the place like no other. The inn had no basement, but we found part of the foundation. She discovered the nearly obliterated drive from the inn door to the Crystal Lake, and guided by the tall magnolias that used to border it, we followed the road as far as the thick growth of underbrush would allow us. There was no sign of the lake. It had long ago been drained. While Bessie dug around for bits of growth to take home and replant, I sat on a log and remembered. I remembered the inn as it had been in the early days, as told me by my father and my mother. I remembered it as it had been when I was a little girl. I thought of it as I had read about it in recent years. A panorama of scenes passed before me. I saw the inn at the height of its glory, when the great folks from Raleigh had frequented it and had spoken in sonorous tones from its canopied porches to attentive groups gathered below. I saw bright throngs of men and women in evening dress, leisurely walking in its bright parlors, strolling down its long porches. I heard again the music of the Urson Trio, the haunting sound of Tom Kelly's voice singing all through the night. I remembered the circuses and the carnivals held on these very grounds. And I saw again Captain Clark in full regalia, astride a splendid white horse, heading a procession up that steep grade to open the convention of the Blues and the Grays. Last of all, I caught a glimpse of a frightened little girl running home that windy November day in 1910, and of her mother waiting for her at the gate. The baby for whose welfare the mother had been so concerned had been born in due time, had grown up, had lived his life, and was now dead. A feeling of loneliness swept over me. I wasn't prepared for ghosts. "Let's go home," I said to Bessie.